decide on principle that what is the current rate of tax. Then all the ministers said yes, this is what we agree to. If the current rate is 5%, we should not tax it at a rate higher than 5%. Finally, it was resolved like that. Otherwise, I think GST with, I don't know what the exemption list would have looked like if it was decided in that manner. Finally, that agreed principle worked, I suppose.
So are we thinking to have negative list plus exemptions or only exemptions?
Negative list for what? Services?
For GST.
Negative list for GST, that means
When there
yes.
are certain goods and services.
Yes. You have to have, no? Can you tax, say, services provided by from government to government? So there will have to be some supplies where you will have to clearly say that these are neither supply of goods nor services.
So one thing, second, are we also envisaging that the state will have the power to exempt the goods are concerned?
No. Whatever
Only
exemption list will be common, everything will be common. That is what in principle everybody has agreed to.
So the exemption list or negative list?
Exemption list will be there, no? If some goods are to be exempted from tax. What you are talking about? Exemption from tax, no?
So one I am talking about, let's say currently service tax with the negative list.
Correct.
After that, the central government has a power to come up with the exemption notifications. So negative list, exemption notifications.
Now see, there is a negative list. That's a different issue. Here again you want to exempt it. What the purpose is? The purpose is that I do not want to tax those services. Similar system will be there in GST.
And then exemption will also be there?
Exemption, yes, through notification if the council decides that one or more services need to be exempted, which is not there in the
It will
list.
go basically for, because in the morning session, Arun Goyal sir was talking, that will not have any kind of exemptions, basically will go with the so far the budgetary allocations are concerned.
No, exemption I understood now what you are talking about. You are talking about exemption to the industry.
Yeah, maybe.
No, that is not going to be there. I am talking about exemption from tax for goods or services. You are confused. I got confused because of that. If you are talking about the exemptions that the industry enjoy today under the central excise, if I have some units in Uttarakhand, yes, there is exemption. So now that exemption is not going to be there in GST. It is for the state to decide. If the state decides that I don't want to impose tax as because I have already promised that industry that I'm going to grant you exemption for a certain period of time, then that state will have to take a call and provide it through a budgetary grant, allocation. It cannot be. In GST, that exemption scheme, what you see today, it is not going to come. It is not going to bring. Automatically, such exemption will not be there. It has to come through the budgetary allocation only. For example, central excise. Now, central excise, say 100 rupees exemption, if you provide to an industry in Uttarakhand. Now my share is there also through the devolution in that 100 rupees that is going to be collected.
Correct.
Am I right or wrong? Now, in that 100 rupees whatever is collected, how can the center take a call and say that I am going to exempt it for this industry?
That's happening correct.
That will affect me also. If anybody has to provide it, it will have to be done through budgetary allocation only. Otherwise, you cannot.
But exemptions will continue for commercial.
That is for the state to decide. It has been left to the states. That is what the council has decided.
Compensating.
Huh? No compensation. They will have to provide it from their own fund. No question of compensating that. Otherwise, you will one state will benefit at the cost of the other. How can you do that? No, nothing like that. Any more questions?
Sir, why credit to real estate sector has been restricted? What is the reason behind that? Earlier it was
What credit has been restricted?
Earlier it was completely denied allowance of input tax rate. Now after the revised act, model law, it says that credit would be allowed only up to the level of those who are doing the construction activities, the works contractor,
yes,
not to the developer. So why there is a stoppage of credit at that level? What is the reason behind that?
Now, see, you have asked what a question that for me to say anything on that issue, it's more of a call that a council has taken. Now you see real estate in this draft that will be the final draft that you will see, we have tried to accommodate as much as was possible and what the council had recommended. It would not be appropriate to me to say anything on that issue, why real estate has been left out. Because I don't think that would be appropriate on my part. But yes, to a great extent, the concern has been taken care of when you will see the final draft. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Mr. Sudhish Pai will be making his address on fiscal federalism now. Mr. Pai is a visiting professor at the Ashutosh Mukherjee Chair at NUJS. He started his practice of law close to, more than 3 decades ago, which includes administrative, constitutional, as well as civil laws. Sir has also handled sensitive litigation on behalf of the government of Karnataka at the High Court of Karnataka as well as the Supreme Court. Incidentally and notably, Sir has also assisted the eminent jurist Dr. Durgadas Basu in revising his famous commentary on constitutional law between 1993 and 1997. So it's indeed a privilege to have you here, and we would love to hear from you on this subject.
Good afternoon to everyone. To borrow the language of cricket, speakers before me have taken the shine off the ball. There's hardly anything left to add usefully. With that shield of protection, I'll share with you a few thoughts on the subject. When I'm asked to speak on fiscal federalism, basically I would have to talk about federalism as such. I think Professor Vijay Kumar hit the nail on the head when he said, if I may say so with great respect, that federalism is an evolving concept. It is not frozen in time or place. That's exactly what Justice Frankfurter also had to say as a professor. In fact, he said, federalism is not a form of government with unvarying contempt. Federal governments are not the offspring of political science, but the product of social and economic forces. Federalism is an idea, just like any other idea in government, and the movement of federalism with its beneficial results is more important than any assumption of rigidity with its form. That was also the signature tune of discussions in the Constituent Assembly. India, as the Constitution says, is a union of indestructible union of states. It's not a federation in the strict sense. That's the terminology. And Dr. Ambedkar, introducing the draft constitution, laid great emphasis on this. Explained the significance of the use of the expression union instead of federation, saying that it is deliberate. For though divided into different units, states, for the convenience of administration, the country is one integral whole, its people a single people, living under a single imperium, derived from a single source. I think this is the bottom line, which we cannot forget. And even the Constitution in Article 3 permits Parliament to change states, change their boundaries, change their names, and if you take it to its logical conclusion, they can even be abolished. Let us not forget it, and that's exactly what Professor Vijay Kumar said, talking of sovereignty of states is a fairy tale. Dr. Ambedkar also reminded us that the basic principle of federalism is the legislative and executive authority is partitioned between the federation, that's the central government, and the units. That is present in the Indian constitutional scheme, and therefore it would not be wrong to say that India is federal in character, and the Supreme Court has accepted federalism as part of the basic structure. And the court's supervision over that is also part of the basic structure of our federalism. And India, as a matter of inevitable necessity, accepted a flexible pattern of federalism. The powers are divided, that's all too well known to bear repetition. but it is axiomatic that the strength and success of any federal polity involving dual governments and division of powers depends upon the maximum cooperation and coordination among the center and the units. And that brings in the idea of cooperative federalism. Today, cooperative federalism is the in thing, even in an orthodox federation like the United States. Cooperative federalism is what prevails. In fact, right from 1936, Justice Stone's judgment in Carmichael, cooperative federalism has come to stay. India too, it has been recognized. Even the Supreme Court recognized it in '63. The division of powers also pertains to the financial area, and perhaps the mechanism of the Finance Commission, which we have, no other federal constitution as far as I know has such a mechanism. It's perhaps India's, the founding fathers' original contribution to federal relationship. And on the whole, in spite of the political pulls and pressures, the Finance Commission of India has been one of the major success stories in the Constitution. Even in the Constitution as originally envisaged, though we have 3 lists and division of legislative powers, there are also certain articles, very prominent among them, 249 to 253, where under certain conditions, in certain circumstances, Parliament can legislate even with respect to laws in the state list. And therefore, that is the original federalism which is envisaged in our constitutional scheme. I am only referring it for that limited purpose. Professor Vijay Kumar made pointed reference to 253 and 51C. In today's evolving world, our commitment to international treaties and obligations cannot be forgotten. And sovereignty is only within your 4 walls. You don't have any absolute sovereignty. As they say in common language, my liberty begins where my liberty ends where your liberty begins. In that sense, sovereignty is only within the 4 corners of your own state. But in the International Committee of Nations, we have our obligations to fulfill, and it is also in furtherance of those obligations which is also constitutionally recognized. It's not something dehorsed the Constitution. The Constitution recognizes, enables, and requires you to do that in circumstances. And it's in furtherance of those principles that the GST regime, the Constitution 101st Amendment Act, has also been brought into force. There are 1 or 2 thoughts that I thought, taking a cue from the discussions during the course of the day. Doubts have been expressed that the legislatures lose their so-called sovereignty in making laws. That the GST Council recommends, and though called a recommendation, it's virtually binding. My take on this for your kind consideration is this. We must remember, as was said long ago, right at the beginning, virtually in 1955, Chief Justice B.K. Mukherjee's judgment in Ram Javaya Kapoor, that our constitution, you don't have strict separation of powers. There is more fusion than separation, at least between the legislative and the executive wings. Forget the judiciary, that's a different thing. No doubt laws are passed by Parliament and the state legislature. but they don't come in the vacuum. Who initiates legislation? It's not Parliament which initiates, it's the Cabinet. Even the rules of procedure in Parliament and the state legislature lay down that a bill, except a private member's bill, is initiated in the Cabinet, the executive that is responsible to the legislature, which in turn is responsible and accountable to the people. So a law is initiated in the executive and then passed in the legislature. Now if we look at the GST Council, the GST Council comprises the Union Finance Minister and the Minister of State and ministers dealing with finance or revenue of all the states. Who are they? They are not some outsiders, they are not some third parties. They are essentially members of the Council of Ministers of each of the Union or the states, and therefore they reflect, I should think, the consensus, the voice of the executive government of the Union and the states. It is this which comes together in the Council as the voice of the Council, and that gets translated into a law either by Parliament or the state legislatures. The Cabinet initiating a legislation is to some extent digressed or changed by the Council, which again I think reflects the consensus of the executive government, and the law is framed. Talking of all this, we cannot also overlook the fact, it's not just a fact, it's a constitutional reality, that the Constitution is a political instrument. It's not a private contract. It's not our sale deed to be interpreted in that fashion. It's a political instrument, and the working of it, the Constitution, is as much political as legal. And that's why I think it was Professor Bradley who wisely said that these relationships, being also political, men of law like me should resist the temptation of prescribing strict rules for their enforcement. Many times lawyers and judges can be ignorant of how political institutions work, and that plays havoc for the nation. And there are situations, perhaps, to borrow the language of late Justice Scalia in one of his dissenting opinions, that the nation will live to regret tomorrow for what the courts have done today. This is also an aspect which we cannot lose sight of. It's for the first time that a concurrent taxing power has been conferred. Of course, there is no entry, but 246A is sufficient enough. An entry is not a source of legislative power in the Constitution. It's only a subject of legislation. The source of power is always the constitutional provision. 246A is the constitutional provision which enables the levy of GST. The whole object of the Constitution Amendment, as has been, it's right to say that, is to simplify the tax structure. Of course, whether that desired result is achieved or not is for time to say. To simplify the tax structure, avoid multiplicity of tax legislation, it's perhaps too early now in 2017 to comment on that. As Justice Om said, you must allow some play in the joints. And so I think we must allow the system to work. Failures may be there. I think all of us learn from our failures. And it may be too early to comment on that. On the whole, the GST regime is a matter of fiscal policy, which is expected to yield better results. And I would think the federal principle has not really been diluted or adversely affected, minor deviations notwithstanding. After all, we must remember that the Constitution is meant not just for the passing hour, but to endure and serve generations yet unborn, and intended for an expanding future. The Indian Constitution is reputed to be flexible and resilient to cope with the demands of changing times and circumstances. I'd only end by saying what Justice Cardoso said in a dissenting judgment long ago, but which I think would appropriately apply. He said that in a slightly different context, talking of separation of powers. The principle is not a doctrinaire concept to make use of with pedantic rigor. There must be sensible approximation, there must be elasticity of adjustment in response to the practical necessities of government, which cannot foresee today the developments of tomorrow in their nearly infinite variety. Thank you for your patient hearing.